The damp walls of the boarding house seemed to close in on Clara Matthews as she sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her few possessions packed into a worn carpet bag. The musty smell of mold mixed with the acrid smoke from the coal stove, creating an atmosphere that matched her despair. Through the thin walls, she could hear her sister-in-law's sharp voice berating one of the servants, a sound that had become all too familiar in the 3 months since Thomas had died. "You need to be out by week's end," Margaret had announced that morning, her lips pursed in the same disapproving line she'd worn since the day Thomas first brought Clara home. "We've been more than charitable, but this family cannot continue to support a woman who contributes nothing." Clara's hands trembled as she smoothed the creases from the newspapers she'd found discarded in the parlor. Among the advertisements for patent medicines and farm equipment, one small notice had caught her eye. Respectable rancher. Age 35, seeks capable woman for matrimony. Must be skilled in household management and cooking. Passage paid upon acceptance. Right to be Campbell. Willow Creek, Montana Territory. The words blurred as tears threatened to fall. A mail-order bride. Is this what her life had come to? She thought of Thomas, of the pneumonia that had taken him so quickly, leaving her with nothing but debts that his family had grudgingly paid before casting her aside. No respectable employment would have her without references, and Margaret had made it clear she would provide none. The boarding house room grew colder as evening fell. Clara lit the single candle allotted to her and pulled out a sheet of paper she'd taken from the writing desk when no one was looking. Her pen hovered over the page for a long moment before she began. "Dear Mr. Campbell, I am writing in response to your advertisement. 500 miles west." Boone Campbell stood at the fence line of his ranch, watching the sun set over the Montana mountains. The wind carried the bite of coming winter, and he knew the months ahead would be brutal. His cattle needed tending, fences needed mending, and the house, Lord, the house was falling apart around him since Martha had died 2 winters past. He'd placed the advertisement on a whim. Really, Jake Morrison from the neighboring ranch had found himself a wife that way, and while the woman seemed skittish as a wild colt, she kept a good house and had already given Jake 2 sons. Boone didn't need sons. Didn't need love either. What he needed was someone who could cook a decent meal and keep the ranch house from becoming a complete disaster while he worked the land. The letter arrived 3 weeks later, carried by the weekly mail rider. Boone read it by lamplight, his calloused fingers careful with the delicate paper. The handwriting was neat, educated. She listed her skills: cooking, mending, preserving food, tending a kitchen garden. She mentioned she was widowed but gave no details. She was 26 years old and in good health. He wrote back the next day, enclosing the train fare and instructions to take the Union Pacific as far as Billings, then the stagecoach to Willow Creek. It was a business arrangement, nothing more. He made that clear in his letter. Clara's journey west began on a gray November morning. The train station in Boston was crowded with travelers, but she felt utterly alone as she clutched her ticket and carpet bag. She'd sold her wedding ring to buy a heavier coat and boots, knowing that her thin Eastern clothing would be useless in Montana. Still, as she caught her reflection in the station window, she saw how shabby she looked. Her black morning dress was worn at the seams, her bonnet several seasons out of fashion. The train car was cramped and smoky. Clara found a seat near the back, away from the families with crying children and the men who stared too long at a woman traveling alone. For 3 days and nights, she dozed fitfully, ate sparingly from the food she'd packed, and watched the landscape change from the familiar forests of the east to the vast, empty plains. In Chicago, she had to change trains. The station was even more chaotic than Boston, and she nearly missed her connection. A kind porter, seeing her confusion, guided her to the right platform. As the train pulled away from the city and headed into the true west, Clara felt the last ties to her old life breaking. The further west they traveled, the rougher the conditions became. The train cars were less comfortable, the stops more primitive. Her fellow passengers changed too. Fewer city folks in proper clothes, more cowboys, miners, and settlers in worn leather and homespun. She kept her eyes down and spoke to no one, but she could feel their curious glances. A woman, alone, heading into the territories, was unusual enough to draw attention. By the time she reached Billings, Clara was exhausted, grimy, and beginning to doubt the wisdom of her decision. The stagecoach to Willow Creek was even worse than the train, a bone-jarring ride over rutted roads that seemed to go on forever. Her traveling companions were two cowboys who smelled of whiskey and a traveling salesman who tried repeatedly to engage her in conversation until one of the cowboys told him to leave the lady be. Willow Creek appeared just as the sun was setting, a small cluster of buildings huddled against the vastness of the Montana landscape. The stagecoach stopped in front of what passed for a hotel, though it looked more like a large saloon with rooms above. Clara stepped down, her legs shaky from the journey, and looked around for someone who might be B. Campbell. She didn't have to wait long. A tall man separated himself from the shadows near the general store and walked toward her. He was perhaps 35, as his letter had said, with dark hair that needed cutting and a face weathered by sun and wind. He wore work clothes, canvas pants, a wool shirt, leather vest, all showing the wear of hard use. His expression was unreadable as he stopped in front of her. "Mrs. Matthews?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. "Boone Campbell." He didn't offer his hand, didn't smile. His eyes, a startling blue against his tanned face, took in her appearance with one quick glance. She saw something flicker across his features. Disappointment, resignation, before his expression closed off again. "Wagon's over here." He picked up her carpetbag without asking and headed toward a weather-beaten wagon hitched to two sturdy horses. Clara followed, aware of the curious stares from the few people on the street. She could imagine what they saw. A thin, pale Eastern woman in a shabby dress, clearly out of place in this rough frontier town. Boone helped her up to the wagon seat with impersonal efficiency, his hands strong but careful. He climbed up beside her and clicked to the horses as they pulled away from town, heading into the growing darkness. Neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the creak of wagon wheels and the distant howl of wind across the plains. Clara pulled her coat tighter and wondered what she had done. Beside her, this stranger, who was now her husband in all but law, stared straight ahead, as remote and forbidding as the mountains that loomed in the distance. She had traded one form of desolation for another, but at least here, she thought, she might have a chance to prove her worth through work rather than connections. The ranch house appeared out of the darkness, a low structure of logs and rough planks. Even in the dim light, Clara could see it needed attention. The porch sagged, shutters hung crooked, and the yard was bare dirt. But smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth, and that was enough for now. Boone stopped the wagon and helped her down. "I'll show you to your room," he said, the first words he'd spoken since leaving town. "We'll discuss the arrangements in the morning." As Clara followed him into the house that would be her new home, she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin. She had survived the journey. She would survive whatever came next. The morning light revealed the house in all its worn glory. Clara stood in the main room, taking inventory of what would be her domain. The walls were solid log construction, chinked with mud that had cracked in places, letting in thin streams of cold air. The floor was rough planks, swept but not truly clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel bare except for an oil lamp and a dented tin cup. The kitchen area occupied one corner, with a cast-iron stove that had seen better days, a few shelves holding mismatched dishes, and a table scarred from years of use. Everything spoke of a bachelor's indifference to domestic comfort, functional but joyless. Boone emerged from what she assumed was his bedroom, already dressed for the day's work. He barely glanced at her as he moved to the stove to pour coffee from a pot that had been sitting there since who knew when. "Your room's through there," he said, nodding toward a door she hadn't noticed the night before. "Was the storage room, but I cleared it out. There's a bed and dresser. Should serve." Clara found the room small but private, with a narrow window looking out toward the barn. The bed was just a simple frame with a straw mattress, but the quilts looked warm, if faded. Someone, Boone, had left a pitcher and basin on the dresser. When she returned to the main room, Boone was sitting at the table with his coffee. He gestured for her to sit. "Here's how this works," he said without preamble. "I need someone to keep house, cook meals, tend the vegetable garden come spring, washing, mending, whatever else needs doing inside. I'll handle everything outside, the cattle, horses, fences, and such. We'll take meals together for convenience, but otherwise, we keep to ourselves. Sunday mornings, we go to town for church and supplies. That's when you can get whatever you need from Morrison's store." "Questions?" Clara shook her head, though she had many. His tone made it clear he wanted efficiency, not conversation. "I'll need to know what foodstuffs you have," she said quietly. "And your preferences for meals. Root cellars out back, smokehouse too. Eat whatever's there. I'm not particular." He stood, setting his cup on the table with a decisive thud. "I'll be working the north pasture today. Supper at sundown." And with that, he was gone, leaving Clara alone in the silent house. She spent the morning exploring her new territory. The root cellar was well stocked with potatoes, turnips, carrots, and onions, along with barrels of flour, salt pork, and dried beans. The smokehouse held several haunches of venison and what looked like bear meat, basic supplies, but she could work with them. By afternoon, she had swept the floors properly, beaten the dust from the rugs, and scrubbed the table until the wood grain showed through. She found Boone's meager supply of clothing and set aside what needed mending. The kitchen received particular attention. She scoured the stove, organized the shelves, and took inventory of the cooking implements. As the sun lowered, she prepared supper: venison stew with root vegetables, biscuits made from the sourdough starter she found hibernating in a crock, and dried apple compote she discovered in a forgotten jar. She set the table with the best of the mismatched dishes, even found a stub of candle to light. Boone returned as darkness fell, bringing with him the smell of horses and hard work. He stopped in the doorway, clearly surprised by the transformation. His eyes moved from the clean floor to the set table to Clara standing by the stove in her flour-dusted apron. "Supper's ready," she said simply. He washed at the basin by the door, another improvement she'd made, setting out soap and a clean towel, and sat down. Clara served the meal and took her own seat. They ate in complete silence, but she noticed he cleaned his plate and took a second biscuit. "It's good," he said finally, the words seeming pulled from him reluctantly. "Thank you." It was Thursday before the trip to town. Clara had settled into a routine of sorts, up before dawn to start the stove and make breakfast. Days filled with the endless work of maintaining even this simple household. Evenings spent mending by lamplight while Boone read week-old newspapers or worked on harness repairs. She'd found a piece of mirror and was dismayed by her appearance. The harsh journey and hard work had left her looking more worn than ever. Her one good dress was for church, leaving her everyday dress increasingly threadbare. But there was nothing to be done about it. The ride to town was as silent as their meals. Willow Creek looked larger in daylight, but no less rough. The main street was rutted mud, bordered by false-fronted buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support. Morrison's general store occupied the largest building, its windows displaying everything from bolts of cloth to mining equipment. Inside, the store was crowded with Saturday shoppers. Clara felt the weight of curious stares as she moved through the aisles, selecting the items on her list: thread, soap, coffee, sugar. She lingered briefly by the fabric display, fingering a piece of practical brown wool, but moved on. Boone hadn't given her money for anything beyond necessities. She approached the counter where Mrs. Morrison, a stout woman with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, presided like a queen over her domain. "You'd be Campbell's new woman?" "Mrs." Morrison said, her tone making it clear this was not a question. Her gaze swept over Clara's shabby dress with obvious disdain. "From back east, aren't you?" "Yes, ma'am." Boston. The woman's lips pursed. Well, we don't put on airs here. This isn't some fancy city where people live on credit and appearances. Cash on the barrel or nothing at all. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. Of course, Mr. Campbell has an account. He does, but I don't know you, do I? Could be anybody claiming to be his woman. Where's your proof? The store had gone quiet. Other customers turning to watch the exchange. Clara's hands trembled as she clutched her basket. He didn't. I have a list in his writing. A list? Mrs. Morrison laughed, a harsh sound. Any fool can forge a list. You think I was born yesterday? Look at you, dressed like a rag picker, putting on lady airs, mail-order bride. They're saying, well, we've seen your type before. Here one day, gone the next, usually with whatever isn't nailed down. That's not... I wouldn't... Clara's voice caught. Best you wait outside for Campbell. I don't serve strangers, especially ones who look like they haven't got 2 pennies to rub together. Go on now. Out with you. You're holding up real customers. Clara stood frozen, aware of the whispers starting around her, the amused smiles of the other women, the frank stares of the men. Her basket fell from numb fingers, the meager supplies scattering across the floor. I said out, Mrs. Morrison came around the counter, her bulk intimidating. Don't make me call Sheriff Watson. Clara fled. She pushed past the gawking customers and stumbled out onto the wooden sidewalk, gulping the cold air. Tears burned her eyes, but she wouldn't let them fall, not here where everyone could see. She pressed herself against the side of the building, trying to become invisible. She didn't know how long she stood there before Boone found her. He came out of the feed store across the way, saw her huddled by the wall, and something in his expression shifted. Without a word, he took her arm and guided her to the wagon. What happened? His voice was gruff, but not unkind. Clara shook her head, unable to speak past the knot in her throat. Boone's jaw tightened. He helped her onto the wagon seat, then strode into Morrison's store. Through the window, Clara could see animated gestures. Mrs. Morrison's face reddening. Boone's stance rigid with controlled anger. He emerged with a full basket of supplies and practically threw them into the wagon bed. They were halfway home before he spoke. She had no call to treat you that way. Clara stared at her clenched hands. She was right, though. Look at me. I do look like a rag picker. You look like a woman who's working hard and making do, he said firmly. Nothing wrong with that. The unexpected defense made the tears finally spill over. Clara turned her face away, mortified to be crying in front of him, but Boone just clicked to the horses and let her cry, offering the silent comfort of pretending not to notice. That night, after another quiet supper, Clara excused herself early. In her small room, she sat on the bed and wept. For her lost life, for Thomas, for the humiliation of the day, for the bleakness of her future. She pressed her face into the pillow to muffle the sobs. But in a house with thin walls, there were no secrets. On the other side of the wall, Boone lay in his own bed, staring at the ceiling. The sound of her crying twisted something inside him he'd thought long dead. He remembered another woman's tears, but those had been different. Angry, bitter, accusing. Clara's were the tears of someone trying very hard to be strong and failing. He rose and walked to her door, raised his hand to knock, then let it fall. What could he say? What comfort could he offer? He was a man who'd forgotten how to be gentle, how to be kind. Instead, he stood there in the dark, listening to her quiet sobs, and felt the first crack in the wall he'd built around himself. The next morning, Clara found a small bundle on the kitchen table. Wrapped in brown paper were several skeins of wool yarn, a card of needles, and beneath them, folded carefully, a woolen shawl. It was clearly old. The blue color faded to gray in places, but it was warm and well made. There was no note, and when Boone came in for breakfast, he said nothing about it. Clara held the shawl up to the light, studying the pattern. It was fine work, intricate cables and delicate edges that spoke of hours of patient labor. She wondered whose hands had made it, but didn't ask. Some questions were better left unspoken in this house of silences. Over the following days, she found other things appearing without explanation. A length of sturdy brown cloth suitable for a work dress, a pot of honey for the breakfast biscuits, a worn but serviceable pair of boots that happened to be just her size. Each time, Boone acted as if nothing had happened, going about his work with the same taciturn efficiency. Clara understood this was his way, unable to speak kindness. He showed it in these small, practical gestures. She accepted the gifts in the spirit they were given, with quiet gratitude and no fuss. The shawl became her constant companion in the cold mornings, and she set to work altering the brown cloth into a simple but decent dress. The transformation in the house continued. Clara attacked years of bachelor neglect with determined energy. She mixed a whitewash from lime and water, brightening the dark corners. She mended the torn curtains and made new ones from flour sacks. She discovered a forgotten garden plot behind the house and began planning for spring planting. One evening, as she served a meal of rabbit stew and cornbread, Boone actually looked up from his plate. "House looks different," he said. "I hope that's acceptable." Clara replied carefully. "It's good. Been needing attention for a while." He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "You cook better than I expected." It was the closest he'd come to a compliment, and Clara treasured it. She'd learned to read the subtle signs of his approval, the way he'd take a second helping, the slight relaxation of his shoulders when he came in to find a warm meal waiting, the way his eyes would linger on some improvement she'd made. One morning, a fierce wind rattled the windows and brought the smell of snow. Boone frowned as he looked out at the darkening sky. "Storm coming," he said. "Need to move the cattle to the sheltered pasture. Might take all day." "I'll pack you a meal," Clara offered. He nodded, then hesitated at the door. "Ever ridden a horse?" Clara shook her head, surprised by the question. "Might be time you learned. Gets lonely out here, especially in winter. Be good if you could get around some on your own." It wasn't quite an invitation, but Clara sensed it was as close as he could come to one. "I'd like that," she said simply. The lesson came a few days later. After the storm had passed, Boone led out a gentle mare named Buttercup, patient and steady. Clara stood nervously as he explained the basics of saddling and mounting. Her first attempt to get on was embarrassingly clumsy. Her skirts tangled, her foot missed the stirrup, and she would have fallen if Boone hadn't steadied her. "Here," he said, his hands on her waist. "Put your foot here, grab the saddle horn, and swing up." The touch was impersonal, purely instructive, but Clara felt the strength in his hands, the easy way he lifted her weight. Once in the saddle, she clutched the horn desperately as the ground seemed very far away. "Relax," Boone said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Buttercup's not going anywhere. Just breathe and find your balance." They spent an hour in the corral, Boone leading the mare in slow circles while Clara learned to move with the horse's rhythm. By the end, she was able to guide Buttercup on her own, though her legs shook when she dismounted. "You did good," Boone said, and Clara glowed at the praise. The riding lessons became a regular occurrence when weather and work permitted. Sometimes Boone would suggest a short ride to check the fence line or scout for strays. Transparent excuses to get her out of the house. Clara began to look forward to these outings, the only times when the strict boundaries between them seemed to soften slightly. It was on one such ride that things shifted. They'd ridden farther than usual, following a deer trail up into the foothills. The day was crisp but sunny, the sky a brilliant blue that seemed to go on forever. At the top of a rise, Boone pulled up and dismounted. "Thought you might like to see this," he said, helping her down. The view was breathtaking. The valley spread out below them like a patchwork quilt, the ranch a tiny collection of buildings in the distance. Mountains rose on all sides, their peaks already white with snow. The wind tugged at Clara's hair, loosening it from its tight bun, and she didn't bother to fix it. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Martha used to—" Boone cut himself off abruptly, his face closing. Clara waited, but he said nothing more. Martha, the wife who'd died, whose shawl now warmed Clara's shoulders. She wanted to ask, but sensed this was dangerous ground. They stood in silence, the wind whipping Clara's loosened hair across her face. The late afternoon sun caught in the strands, turning them to copper. Her cheeks were pink from the cold and exercise, her eyes bright as she gazed at the magnificent landscape. "You look," Boone started, then stopped, but his eyes stayed on her, something unguarded in them for just a moment. "You look beautiful up here, like you belong." The words hung between them, surprising them both. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the wind. Boone turned away abruptly, moving to check his horse's saddle as if it needed adjustment. "We should head back," he said roughly. "Gets dark fast this time of year." The ride home was silent, but it was a different kind of silence, charged with something new and uncertain. Clara was acutely aware of Boone riding beside her, the broad set of his shoulders, the competent way he handled his horse. When they reached the ranch and he helped her dismount, his hands lingered just a moment longer than necessary. That night, Clara took extra care with supper: venison roast with wild mushroom gravy, mashed turnips whipped with butter she'd been saving, and apple cake from the last of the dried fruit. She put on her new brown dress and took time to arrange her hair properly. When Boone came in, he stopped short, taking in the set table, the special meal. Clara in her new dress. Something flickered in his eyes, pleasure, wariness, before he schooled his expression back to neutral. They ate quietly as always, but Clara noticed he savored each bite, even closed his eyes briefly when he tasted the apple cake. When the meal was finished, instead of immediately retreating to his chair by the fire, he lingered at the table. "Thank you," he said, "for the meal, for—" He gestured vaguely at the clean, warm room. "All of this. It's what I'm here for," Clara said softly. "Is it?" The question seemed to surprise him as much as her. He stood abruptly. "I mean, yes, of course." He grabbed his coat and headed for the door. "Need to check the horses." Clara watched him go, confused by his sudden retreat. What had she done wrong? She cleared the table slowly, her earlier happiness dimming. Perhaps she'd misread his comment on the hillside. Perhaps beautiful had been about the view. Not her. Perhaps she was a fool for hoping this arrangement could become something more. Later, as she sat mending by lamplight, she heard Boone's footsteps on the porch, but he didn't come in. Through the window, she could see him standing at the rail, a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. He stood there for a long time, and Clara wondered what thoughts kept him out in the cold rather than in the warmth she'd tried to create for him. When he finally came in, she kept her eyes on her sewing. He paused by her chair, and she held her breath, waiting. For a moment, she thought he might speak, might bridge the growing distance between what they were and what they could be. But the moment passed. He murmured goodnight and disappeared into his room, leaving Clara alone with her needle and thread and the quiet crackle of the dying fire. In the days that followed their ride to the hilltop, Clara found herself filled with new purpose. She carefully took apart her old wedding dress, the last remnant of her former life, and began refashioning it. The ivory silk was still good, though yellowed with age. She could make it into a simple but elegant dress, something better than her worn everyday clothes. Working by lamplight in the evenings, she tried to ignore how Boone had grown more distant since that day. He took his meals quickly and found excuses to be outside, even in the growing cold. The easy companionship of their rides had vanished, replaced by a careful avoidance that hurt more than his initial indifference. Still, Clara persisted. She found dried beets in the root cellar and experimented until she could extract a reddish stain for her lips and cheeks. She heated curling rods in the stove and tried different ways of arranging her hair. It wasn't vanity. Exactly. More a desperate attempt to prove she could be more than the bedraggled creature who'd arrived on his doorstep. One morning, she emerged wearing the remade dress, her hair pinned up in soft waves, a touch of beet stain giving life to her pale complexion. Boone was at the table, coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips. His eyes swept over her, and something flared in their depths before he looked away. "Going somewhere special?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "No," Clara said, smoothing the skirt nervously. "I just thought it seemed wasteful not to make use of good fabric." He nodded curtly and fled to the barn, leaving his coffee unfinished. Clara's shoulders sagged. She'd hoped, what, that a pretty dress would change everything? She felt foolish, like a girl playing dress-up, but she kept wearing the dress, and gradually added other small touches. She found an old bottle of rosé water in a forgotten drawer and used it sparingly. She rubbed her hands with tallow and honey until they grew softer. She practiced her posture, remembering her mother's lessons about how a lady should carry herself. The effect wasn't lost on Boone, though he tried to hide it. Clara caught him watching her sometimes, his expression unguarded for just a moment before he caught himself. He began finding more reasons to stay out late, to take his supper quickly, to avoid the quiet evenings by the fire. One afternoon, Jake Morrison stopped by to discuss buying some of Boone's cattle. He was a friendly man with an easy smile, and he tipped his hat politely to Clara. "Mrs. Campbell, pleasure to see you. You're looking well. This old hermit treating you right?" We're not, Clara flushed, glancing at Boone. "She's Miss Matthews," Boone said stiffly. That is, the arrangement is..." Jake's eyebrows rose. "Oh, I see. Well, my mistake." But his knowing smile suggested he saw more than Boone intended. After Jake left, having agreed to buy 20 head, Boone seemed agitated. He paced the main room while Clara prepared supper, his usual stillness replaced by restless energy. "People will talk," he said abruptly, "about you being here, unmarried. Does that trouble you?" Clara asked carefully. "Doesn't trouble me. But your reputation..." "My reputation?" Clara laughed, but it was bitter. "I'm a mail-order bride who can't afford a decent dress. What reputation do I have to protect?" "Don't say that." His voice was sharp. You're a decent woman. Better than this place. Better than you." Clara faced him, suddenly angry. "Is that what you think? That I'm too good for you? Or is it that I'm not good enough? Which is it, Boone? Because I can't tell anymore." He stared at her, something working in his jaw. "You should have married some city man, someone who'd give you a proper house, proper clothes. Not this." He gestured at the cabin, at himself. "I didn't want a city man," Clara said quietly. I want... "What?" He moved closer, his eyes intense. "What do you want?" The air between them crackled. Clara's heart pounded as she looked up at him. "I want to stop pretending we're strangers. I want to stop acting like we're just business partners when we both know..." "Know what?" His voice was rough. "That something's changed. That day on the hilltop. You looked at me like I mattered. And ever since, you've been running from it." Boone's hands clenched at his sides. "You don't understand. My wife, Martha, I failed her. I couldn't make her happy here. She hated this life, hated the isolation, hated..." He broke off. "Hated you." Maybe, by the end, the admission seemed torn from him. "She took up with a traveling merchant. Can't say I blamed her. I'm not an easy man to live with." Clara reached out tentatively, touching his arm. "You're not the same man you were then, and I'm not Martha." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then up at her face. "No," he said softly. "You're not." For a moment, they stood frozen, balanced on the edge of something. Then Boone pulled away, grabbing his coat. "I need to check the stock," he muttered, and was gone before Clara could respond. That night, snow began to fall. Clara lay in her narrow bed, listening to the wind howl around the cabin. She'd pushed too hard, said too much. Tomorrow, she'd apologize, try to return things to their careful balance. But in the middle of the night, she heard Boone moving around the main room, wrapping her shawl around her nightgown. She crept to her door and peered out. He was sitting at the table, head in his hands, a bottle of whiskey before him. The glass was full but untouched. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. He looked up, unsurprised by her presence. "Did I wake you?" No. She moved closer, noting the deep lines around his eyes, the weariness in his posture. Boone, I'm sorry about earlier. I shouldn't have. You were right, he interrupted. I have been running since Martha died. Maybe before that. He stared at the amber liquid in his glass. Told myself I was done with all that. Feeling things, wanting things. Easier to just work and sleep and not think too much. Clara sat down across from him. And then I arrived. And then you arrived. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. With your proper manners and your Eastern ways. Working yourself to the bone to make this place a home. Making me remember what it felt like to come in from the cold and find warmth waiting. Is that such a bad thing? Maybe not, but I'm scared. Clara. The admission seemed to surprise him. Scared of wanting something I don't deserve. Scared of failing you like I failed her. You haven't failed me. Clara whispered. You've been kind in your own way. Those gifts, the shawl, the cloth, teaching me to ride. You may not say much, but your actions speak. Boone finally looked at her directly. That day on the hilltop, you were beautiful. Are beautiful. But it's more than that. It's the way you hum when you cook. The way you treat this old cabin like it's worth saving. The way you look at me like I might be worth saving too. Clara's breath caught. Boone. I'm no good at this, he said roughly. Words and feelings and such, but He reached across the table, his calloused hand covering hers. I don't want to run anymore. Clara turned her hand palm up, interlacing their fingers. Then don't. They sat there in the lamplight, hands joined across the scarred table, as snow piled against the windows. It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet, but it was a beginning, a tentative bridge across the canyon of loneliness that had separated them. Finally, Boone stood, gently pulling Clara to her feet. For a moment, they stood close, her hand still in his. Then, with infinite care, he raised his other hand to her cheek, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. You should get some sleep, he said softly. Getting cold in here. But neither of them moved. Clara lifted her free hand to cover his against her cheek. In a moment, she whispered. And still they stood, drawing out this fragile new connection. Afraid that movement might shatter it. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small circle of lamplight, something warm and hopeful had finally taken root. The morning after their midnight conversation, Clara woke to find fresh firewood stacked by her door and hot coffee already made. Small gestures, but she understood their significance. Boone was trying, in his quiet way, to show care without overwhelming either of them with sudden change. For several days, they circled each other carefully, testing this new understanding. Boone lingered a bit longer at meals. Clara felt free to touch his shoulder when she served his plate. They talked more, not grand conversations, but small exchanges about the weather, the cattle, plans for spring planting. Then came the accident. Clara had been drawing water from the creek, the bank slick with ice beneath a thin cover of snow. Her foot slipped, and she fell hard, her ankle twisting beneath her. The cold water soaked through her skirts as she struggled to right herself, pain shooting up her leg with every movement. She managed to drag herself to the bank, but standing was impossible. The house seemed impossibly far away. She called out, hoping Boone was within earshot, but the wind carried her voice away. Shivering, she tried to crawl, but the pain was too intense. She didn't know how long she sat there, growing colder and more frightened, before she heard hoofbeats. Boone appeared over the rise, his face tight with worry. Clara! He was off his horse and beside her in seconds. What happened? How long have you been here? I fell. My ankle. Her teeth were chattering too hard to speak clearly. Without hesitation, he scooped her into his arms. She gasped at the sudden movement and the pain it caused, but also at the solid warmth of him, the easy strength with which he carried her. You're freezing, he muttered, striding toward the house. Damn fool woman, going to the creek alone in this weather. I've done it dozens of times. Not anymore. His arms tightened around her. Not alone. Inside, He set her gently in the chair by the fire and knelt to examine her ankle. His hands were careful as he unlaced her boot, but she still winced when he eased it off. "Not broken," he said after careful prodding, "but badly twisted. Need to get these wet clothes off before you catch your death." Clara flushed. "I can manage. You can barely sit up." He stood, looking uncertain. I'll fetch some dry things and turn my back. Call out when you're decent." It was a painful, awkward process, but eventually Clara was in dry clothes, her ankle propped and wrapped. Boone built up the fire and brought her hot tea laced with whiskey, then surprised her by pulling the other chair close to hers. "You scared me," he admitted quietly. "When you weren't in the house, and then I saw your bucket by the creek. I'm sorry, I should have been more careful." He shook his head. "I should have been here. Should have gone for the water myself. What if I hadn't come back early? What if—" He broke off, jaw tight. Clara reached out and touched his hand. "But you did come back. You found me." He turned his hand over, gripping hers. Clara, I can't lose someone else. Not again." The raw emotion in his voice made her heart ache. "You won't lose me. I'm tougher than I look." "I know you are." His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "Toughest woman I've known. Making a life out here with nothing but determination and grace. But even tough people need looking after sometimes." For the next 3 days, Boone barely left her side. He carried her to the table for meals, helped her to her room at night, brought her books from his meager collection to pass the time. Clara was touched by his careful attention, the way he anticipated her needs before she could voice them. On the 3rd night, as he helped her to the table for supper, she caught him wincing. "You're back," she said, "from carrying me around like a sack of potatoes." "You're no burden," he said gruffly, but she could see the strain in his movements. "Sit," she ordered. "I can serve dinner sitting down." They ate in companionable quiet, but Clara noticed Boone shifting uncomfortably. When the meal was done, she made a decision. "Help me to the sofa," she said, "and bring the liniment from the shelf." "Clara, you've taken care of me. Now let me return the favor." He helped her hobble to the worn sofa, then sat stiffly beside her. Clara positioned herself so she could reach his shoulders. "You'll need to— that is, your shirt." In the lamplight, she saw color rise in his face, but he unbuttoned his shirt and shrugged it off, presenting his back to her. Clara caught her breath. His shoulders and back were corded with muscle from years of hard work, marked here and there with old scars. She'd known he was strong, but seeing the evidence of it, being this close, she poured liniment into her palm, warming it before touching him. He jerked slightly at the first contact, then slowly relaxed as she worked the knots from his muscles. "Where did you learn this?" he asked, his voice husky. "My mother suffered from rheumatism. I used to help her. She found a particularly tight spot and pressed gently. These scars. War," he said simply. "And after, I was young and angry and stupid for a while." Clara continued her ministrations in silence, feeling the tension gradually leave his body. When she finished, he turned to face her, and she realized how close they were sitting. She could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. "Clara," he said softly, lifting a hand to cup her face. "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to race. "Yes?" "That first day, when I met you at the stage, I thought I'd made a mistake. You looked so lost, so fragile. I thought you'd last maybe a month before heading back east. And now I can't imagine this place without you." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Can't imagine my life without you in it. I'm not good with pretty words, Clara, but I care for you, more than I expected, more than I thought I could again." "Boone," she whispered, leaning into his touch, "I know I'm not what you deserve. I'm set in my ways. I've got a past full of mistakes. And I'll probably never be the kind of man who brings flowers or writes poetry. But I promise I'll take care of you. I'll be faithful and steady and—" Clara silenced him by pressing her fingers to his lips. "I don't need flowers or poetry. I just need you." Something shifted in his expression. vulnerability giving way to intent, slowly, giving her time to pull away. He leaned closer. Their first kiss was tentative, almost hesitant. Two people who'd been hurt testing the waters of trust again. But then Clara's hand came up to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat racing to match hers. And hesitation melted away. The kiss deepened, became something hungrier, needier. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Clara," Boone said roughly, I should stay," she whispered. "Please, just stay with me." He searched her face, then nodded slowly. They settled back against the sofa. Clara tucked against his side, his arm around her. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Tell me about before," Clara said quietly. "About the war, about what made you come here." So he did, his voice low and sometimes halting. He told her about growing up in Tennessee, about joining up young and eager for glory, about the things he'd seen and done that stripped that eagerness away, about drifting afterward, lost and angry, until he'd found this piece of land and decided to try building something instead of destroying. "And Martha?" Clara asked gently. "Met her in Kansas. She was pretty, full of life. Thought she could handle frontier living." He paused. "We were wrong for each other from the start, but too stubborn to admit it. By the end, we could barely stand to be in the same room. I'm sorry." "Don't be. It was what it was." His arm tightened around her. "Made me think I wasn't meant for marriage, for partnership. Better off alone. Then you showed up and started proving me wrong." Clara tilted her head to look up at him. "I'm glad I did." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. "So am I." They talked until the fire burned low, sharing stories and silences equally. When Clara's eyes grew heavy, Boone carried her to her room, his back protesting but ignored. At her door, he hesitated. "This changes things," he said quietly. "Yes," Clara agreed. "Is that all right?" Instead of answering with words, he kissed her again, sweet and lingering. When he pulled back, his eyes were warm with promise. "More than all right," he murmured. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Boone." She listened to his footsteps retreat, then lay in her narrow bed, touching her lips and marveling at how quickly a life could change. Outside, an owl called in the darkness, and the wind whispered secrets to the stars. Inside, Clara felt warm for the first time since arriving in Montana, a warmth that had nothing to do with fires or blankets and everything to do with the man on the other side of the wall, who'd finally let her see past his defenses to the good heart beneath. The weeks following their first kiss brought a warmth to the ranch that had nothing to do with the slowly arriving spring. Clara's ankle healed, and with it came a new rhythm to their days. Boone would find excuses to touch her, a hand on her waist as he passed behind her in the kitchen, fingers brushing as she handed him his coffee, a kiss on her forehead before heading out to work. They hadn't spoken of marriage yet, though both knew it hung in the air between them. For now, they were content with this careful courtship, learning each other in ways that went beyond their initial arrangement. The first test came on a trip to town. Clara wore her remade ivory dress, and Boone had trimmed his hair and put on his church clothes. As they walked down Main Street, Clara's hand tucked in the crook of his arm, she felt the stares and whispers following them. At Morrison's store, Mrs. Morrison's eyes widened seeing them together, but before she could speak, Boone stepped forward. "My wife needs supplies," he said firmly, emphasizing the word. "Put it on my account." "Mrs." Morrison's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. "Your wife?" "That's right." Boone's tone brooked no argument. "Mrs. Clara Campbell. I trust there won't be any problem serving her when I'm not present?" The store had gone quiet, everyone watching. "Mrs." Morrison's face flushed red, but she nodded stiffly. "Of course not. Mr. Campbell." Clara kept her head high as she selected her items, though her hands trembled slightly. "When they left," Boone guided her to the hotel restaurant, a luxury they couldn't really afford. But he insisted, "We're not actually married." Clara whispered once they were seated. "We will be," Boone said simply. "Soon as we can arrange it with Reverend Mills. If that's what you want." It wasn't the most romantic proposal, but Clara saw the vulnerability in his eyes. "Yes," she said softly. "That's what I want." He relaxed visibly, reaching across the table to take her hand. Around them, the other diners stared and whispered, but for once, Clara didn't care. Let them talk. She had found something worth more than their approval. However, not everyone was ready to accept the change. A few days later, while Boone was out checking the herd, a rider approached the house. Clara recognized him from town, Frank Harrigan, who ran freight between settlements and had a reputation for cards and women. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. His smile was too familiar, his gaze too bold. "Heard Campbell's taken himself a bride. Wanted to come pay my respects." "Mr. Campbell isn't here," Clara said, not liking the way he lounged against the porch rail. "I know. Saw him heading to the north pasture." Harrigan's smile widened. "Thought you might enjoy some company. Gets lonely out here for a woman, especially one used to finer things." "I'm quite content, thank you." Clara moved toward the door, but Harrigan shifted to block her path. "Now, don't be unfriendly, just making conversation." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Seems a shame. A pretty thing like you stuck out here. I could show you a real good time in town. Campbell doesn't need to know." "I said I'm content." Clara's voice sharpened. "Please leave." "Come now. We both know what kind of woman becomes a mail-order bride. No need to play coy." The click of a rifle being cocked cut him off. Boone stood at the corner of the house, Winchester aimed steady. "Get off my land." "Harrigan." Harrigan raised his hands, but his smirk remained. "Easy there, Campbell. Just being neighborly." "That what you call it?" Boone's voice was deadly quiet. "Man's got a funny idea of neighborly, approaching his woman when he's gone." "Your woman?" Harrigan laughed. "That's rich. You think putting a ring on her finger changes what she is? We all know why women come west alone." The rifle shot sent Harrigan's hat flying. The man went pale, stumbling backward. "Next one won't miss," Boone said calmly. "And if I hear you've said one word about my wife in town, one word, I'll come find you. We understanding each other?" Harrigan nodded rapidly, scrambling for his horse. As he rode off, Boone lowered the rifle and turned to Clara. The ice in his eyes melted to concern. "Did he touch you? Hurt you?" "No." Clara's voice shook slightly. The things he said." Boone set the rifle aside and pulled her into his arms. "Don't listen to him. Men like that, they see something good and clean and want to dirty it up. Makes them feel bigger somehow. But others might think the same," Clara said against his chest. "About why I came here. What kind of woman that makes me." Boone pulled back to look at her. "You're the kind of woman who was brave enough to travel thousands of miles to an unknown place, who took a rough cabin and made it a home, who saw something worth saving in a bitter old cowboy." His hand cupped her cheek. "That's all that matters." The incident with Harrigan seemed to crystallize something for Boone. That very evening, he brought up their wedding plans. "This Sunday," he said. "After church, Reverend Mills can do it then." "So soon? Should have done it weeks ago. Would have, if I hadn't been so stubborn." He paused. "Unless you need more time." Clara thought of Harrigan's leering face, of Mrs. Morrison's contempt, of all the whispers that followed them. Then she thought of Boone's steady presence, his quiet strength, the tender way he held her. "Sunday's perfect," she said. The news spread quickly. Some folks nodded approval. About time Campbell made an honest woman of her. Others were less kind, whispering about rushed weddings and calculating dates on their fingers. Clara tried to ignore it all, focusing on the small preparations she could manage. She altered her ivory dress once more, adding some lace she'd saved from a petticoat. Boone surprised her with a small gold band he'd ordered from the jeweler in Billings. Nothing fancy, but properly sized and inscribed with their initials. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church with only a handful of witnesses. Jake Morrison stood as Boone's best man, and surprisingly, Mrs. Patterson, the minister's wife, offered to stand with Clara. "Every woman needs someone on her wedding day," she said kindly, ignoring the disapproving looks from some of the congregation. Reverend Mills spoke about commitment, about two becoming one, about the challenges and joys of marriage. Clara barely heard the words, too aware of Boone beside her, his hand warm around hers, his voice steady as he spoke his vows. When it came time to kiss, Boone cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing her cheek before he leaned in. The kiss was soft, reverent, a promise sealed before God and man. Someone in the back made a disapproving sound, but Clara didn't care. She was Boone's wife now, truly and legally. The ride home was quiet, both of them processing the magnitude of what they'd done. As they pulled up to the ranch, Boone helped her down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her up in his arms. "Tradition," he said gruffly at her startled laugh, carrying her over the threshold. Inside, Clara found he'd made efforts of his own. Wildflowers filled a jar on the table, and he'd hung curtains in their bedroom. The narrow bed from her old room had been moved in to create a larger sleeping space. "It's not fancy," Boone said, suddenly uncertain. "But I thought—" Clara silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect. You're perfect." That night, as they lay together as husband and wife, Boone traced gentle patterns on Clara's bare shoulder. The lamp was low, casting golden light over their entwined forms. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. Clara turned in his arms to face him. "None. You? Only that I didn't find you sooner." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Could have saved us both some lonely years. Maybe we needed those years," Clara said thoughtfully, "to become who we are now, the people who could build this together." Boone considered this, then nodded. "Maybe so." His arms tightened around her. "Either way, you're here now. We're here now. That's what matters." Outside, a late spring storm rolled in, rain drumming on the roof, but inside their small home, Clara and Boone held each other close, two wounded souls who'd found healing in the most unexpected place, each other's arms. The first storm of winter came early that year, catching everyone off guard. Boone had been out checking the fence lines when the sky darkened and snow began to fall thick and fast. By the time Clara realized the severity of the storm, visibility had dropped to mere feet. She paced the house, stoking the fire and preparing hot food, trying not to think about all the things that could go wrong. A man lost in a blizzard, frozen to death mere yards from shelter. When darkness fell and Boone still hadn't returned, panic set in. Clara bundled herself in every warm thing she could find and ventured onto the porch, calling his name into the howling wind. The cold was brutal, stealing her breath, and snow stung her face like tiny needles. She couldn't see the barn, couldn't see anything but swirling white. "Boone!" she screamed until her throat was raw, but the storm swallowed her voice. She was about to attempt the treacherous walk to the barn when a dark shape materialized from the white. Boone, covered in ice and snow, stumbled onto the porch. Clara grabbed him, pulling him inside with strength born of desperation. "The horse threw me," he said through chattering teeth. "Had to walk back, got turned around." His lips were blue, his hands like ice. Clara's nursing instincts took over. She stripped him of his frozen clothes, wrapped him in blankets, and positioned him by the fire. She heated water for tea and broth, forcing him to drink despite his protests. "Stop fussing," he mumbled, but his eyes followed her with something like wonder. "Stop nearly dying in blizzards," she retorted, tucking another blanket around him. As the night wore on and his color slowly returned, they talked about his first winter here, about the storms in Boston, about fears and close calls, but underneath the casual conversation ran a deeper current. "Thought I might not make it back," Boone admitted quietly. "Kept thinking about you here alone. Waiting." "Don't," Clara said sharply. "Don't talk like that," Need to, though. This life, it's dangerous. If something happens to me, nothing will happen. She knelt beside his chair, gripping his hands. I won't let it. He smiled sadly. Can't control everything. Clara, need to be practical. There's money hidden in... Stop! Tears were running down her face now. Please, just stop. Boone pulled her up into his lap, holding her close. Shh, I'm here. I'm all right. But you need to know these things. Need to be prepared. I can't, she whispered against his neck. I can't lose you too. Not after Thomas. Not after finally finding... Finding what? His voice was gentle. Home. Love. You. The words came out in a rush. I love you, Boone. I should have said it before, but I love you so much it terrifies me. His arms tightened around her. Clara, sweetheart. He tilted her face up to look at him. I love you too. Have for a while now. Should have told you on our wedding day. But the words, they don't come easy. They don't have to, I know. I've always known. She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and relief and love into it. They spent the night by the fire, unwilling to be separated even by walls. Boone told her about the money, hidden beneath a loose floorboard under the bed, about which neighbors could be trusted to help if needed, about the lawyer in Billings who had his will. You're not going to need any of that, Clara insisted, because you're going to be more careful. Promise me. I promise to try, he said, which was the best she could hope for. The storm lasted 2 days, trapping them inside. By the second day, with chores minimal and nowhere to go, a different kind of restlessness set in. They were still learning each other as husband and wife, still navigating the intimacies of marriage. Clara was mending by the fire when she felt Boone watching her. She looked up to find him studying her with an intensity that made her breath catch. What is it? She asked. Just thinking how different this winter feels from the last ones. How different everything feels. She set aside her sewing and moved to where he sat, settling on his lap in what had become a familiar position. Good different. The best different. His hands settled on her waist. Never thought I'd be grateful for a blizzard, but having you here, safe and warm. There's nowhere else I'd rather be, Clara said softly. His response was to kiss her, slow and deep. The familiar heat built between them, but this time there was no urgency, no desperation. They had time. They had privacy. They had each other. Later, as they lay entwined on the rug before the fire, Boone traced lazy patterns on Clara's back. Never expected this, he murmured. What? Peace, contentment. Thought that part of me died with the war, or maybe with Martha. Figured I'd work this land alone until I couldn't anymore. Clara propped herself on an elbow to look at him. And now? Now I think about spring planting and wonder what vegetables you'll want. Think about adding onto the house, maybe a proper parlor. Think about... He paused, looking almost shy. Think about children, if you want them. Clara's heart swelled. Do you? With you, yes. His hand cupped her cheek. Little girl with your eyes and your stubborn streak. Or a boy with your strength and your kind heart, Clara countered. Either, both, whatever comes. He pulled her down for another kiss. We've got time to figure it out. When the storm finally broke, they emerged to a world transformed. Snow lay thick and pristine, turning the familiar landscape into something magical. But more than that had changed. The two people who'd weathered the storm together were different from the ones who'd entered it. They worked side by side to dig out, to check on the animals, to restore order. But now there were stolen kisses in the barn, lingering touches as they passed, shared smiles over small things. The careful distance they'd once maintained was gone, replaced by the easy intimacy of lovers. That evening, as Clara prepared supper, she heard horses approaching. Boone looked out the window and frowned. It's Sam Watson. Wonder what brings the sheriff out in this weather. Sam Watson was a grizzled man in his 50s. Fair but tough. He accepted Clara's offer of coffee gratefully, warming his hands on the cup. Hate to bring trouble, Boone, but thought you should know. That freight runner. Harrigan, he's been talking in town. Ugly words about your missus. Boone's face darkened. What kind of words? The kind that'd get a man shot, speaking them about another man's wife. Sam glanced apologetically at Clara. Pardon, ma'am, but he's suggesting improper things. About why you came west, about your arrangement before the wedding. That snake, Boone growled. Starting to rise, Sam held up a hand. Now hold on, nobody decent's listening to him. Man's a known drunk and liar, but he's also claiming you threatened him, shot at him, making noise about pressing charges. He was on my property, harassing my wife. I know. Sam sighed. Look, I've got no interest in arresting a man for protecting his family, but Harrigan's got connections with some of the less savory elements in the territory. Watch your back, both of you. After Sam left, Boone was restless, checking and rechecking the windows, cleaning his rifle. You're worrying? Clara said. Men like Harrigan, they're cockroaches. Crush one and 10 more scatter in the dark. He set the rifle by the door. Maybe I should have aimed better. No. Clara moved into his arms. You're not a killer, Boone. That's not who you are anymore. Would be, to protect you. I know, but it won't come to that. She looked up at him. We've survived worse than Frank Harrigan's gossip. We'll survive this too. He held her tight, pressing his face into her hair. Don't know what I'd do if anything happened to you. Nothing will, Clara promised. We're together now. That makes us stronger than any threat. But even as she spoke the words, she couldn't shake the chill that had nothing to do with winter. Sam Watson's warning echoed in her mind. In a land where law was thin and justice often came from the barrel of a gun, words could be as dangerous as bullets. That night, as they prepared for bed, Clara noticed Boone checking the locks again, positioning the rifle within easy reach. The storm outside had passed, but she sensed another one gathering, human in nature and potentially far more destructive. Come to bed, she said softly. Tomorrow's troubles will keep until tomorrow. He joined her, pulling her close. In the darkness, she could feel the tension in his body, the protective instinct that wouldn't let him fully relax. I love you, she whispered, knowing it was what he needed to hear. Love you too, he murmured back. More than my life. They held each other as the wind picked up outside, rattling the windows like a warning. Whatever came next, they would face it together. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that their hard-won happiness was about to be tested in ways they couldn't yet imagine. Spring came slowly to Montana that year, fighting its way through late snows and bitter winds. But when it finally arrived, it brought with it a sense of renewal that matched the transformation in the Campbell Ranch. Clara planted her garden with seeds ordered from back east. Tomatoes, beans, squash, and herbs. Boone built raised beds to protect against the harsh weather, working side by side with his wife in comfortable partnership. The trouble with Harrigan had died down over the winter months. The man had left for the goldfields, some said, or been run out by those tired of his troublemaking. Either way, Clara was grateful for his absence. The townspeople had gradually warmed to her, especially after she'd helped deliver the Morrison baby during a difficult birth when the doctor was away. It was on a warm May morning that everything came to a head. Clara was working in the garden when she heard horses approaching, several of them, riding hard. Boone was in the far pasture, too far to call. 3 men dismounted in the yard. Clara recognized one of them, Harrigan, looking rougher than before, his clothes dusty from hard travel. The other 2 were strangers, hard-faced men with guns tied low on their hips. Well, Harrigan said, his smile ugly. The lady of the house, all alone. How convenient. Clara stood slowly, keeping her face calm though her heart raced. My husband will be back soon. No, he won't. Saw him heading out to check fence lines. Takes hours, that does. Harrigan stepped closer. Thought we might have a conversation about the way he treated me. Man shoots at another man. There's got to be consequences. You were asked to leave our property, Clara said steadily. Several times. Your property? One of the other men laughed. Woman like you, playing house with a washed-up soldier? We know what you really are. Sweetheart, Clara's hand inched toward the garden hoe leaning against the fence. "I'm Mrs. Boone Campbell, and you're trespassing." Trespassing. Harrigan moved closer, his companions flanking him. "Now that's unfriendly. We just came to collect what's owed. Your man cost me reputation, cost me work. Figure his pretty wife might make that up to us." The threat was clear. Clara gripped the hoe, raising it like a weapon. "Stay back." They laughed, spreading out to surround her. Clara's mind raced. The house was too far, the rifle inside useless to her here. She had to buy time, had to hope. A shot rang out. Harrigan's hat flew off, and the men spun to see Boone on horseback, rifle aimed steady despite his horse dancing beneath him. "Step away from my wife," he said, voice deadly calm. "3 against 1, Campbell," one of the strangers called. "Not good odds. Good enough." Boone's aim never wavered. "Clara, go to the house." She started to move, but Harrigan grabbed her arm, yanking her against him. "Don't think so. We came for satisfaction, and we'll have it." What happened next occurred almost too fast to follow. Boone's shot caught Harrigan's gun hand just as he reached for his weapon. Clara wrenched free, swinging the hoe in a wide arc that caught the second man across the knees. He went down howling. The third man drew, but Boone was already moving. Spurring his horse forward, the animal slammed into the gunman, sending him sprawling. In seconds, Boone was off his horse and had the man covered. "Clara, they're guns," he ordered, with shaking hands. She collected the weapons while Boone held the men at rifle point. Harrigan cradled his bleeding hand, cursing steadily. "You 3 are going to get on your horses and ride," Boone said. "Going to ride out of this territory and never come back. Because if I see any of you again, if I hear you're within 100 miles of here, I won't aim for your hand. Understand?" They understood. Within minutes, they were gone. Harrigan slumped in his saddle, the others supporting him. Boone watched until they were out of sight before finally lowering his rifle. Only then did Clara see he was shaking. She ran to him, and he caught her up in a fierce embrace. "When I saw them around you," his voice broke. "If they'd hurt you." "They didn't. You came. I knew you would." He pulled back to examine her, hands gentle as they checked for injury. "You fought them with a garden hoe." "You taught me to be tough," Clara said, managing a watery smile. "Remember?" He kissed her then, desperate and relieved, when they finally broke apart. He rested his forehead against hers. "We can't stay here," he said quietly. "Men like that, they might come back, might bring more. This place isn't safe anymore." Clara's heart sank. This ranch had become home, the first real home she'd had in years, but she understood. Where would we go? North, Canada, maybe, or Oregon. Somewhere we can start fresh, without the past following. He cupped her face. "I know it's asking a lot. Where you go, I go." Clara interrupted. "That's what marriage means, for better or worse. Remember?" They spent the next weeks preparing. The ranch sold to Jake Morrison, who'd been wanting to expand. They kept only what would fit in a wagon. Clothes, tools, the few precious things that made a home. Clara dug up starts from her garden, determined to carry something of this place with them. The night before they left, they stood on the hill where Boone had first called her beautiful. The ranch spread below them in the fading light, already looking like somewhere they used to live rather than home. "Regrets?" Boone asked. Clara leaned into him. "No, home isn't a place. It's wherever you are." He held her close as the sun set over the mountains. "We'll build something better, somewhere safe, where no one knows our past, where you can walk in town with your head high and no whispers following." "I don't care about whispers," Clara said. "I only care about us." They left at dawn, the wagon loaded and ready. As they drove away, Clara didn't look back. She kept her eyes on the horizon, on the future they would build together. Beside her, Boone reached over to take her hand, and she squeezed it tight. The journey was long, taking them through lands Clara had only dreamed of seeing. They crossed rivers and mountains, plains and forests. At night, They camped under stars so bright they took her breath away. Boone told her stories of the constellations, and she told him about her dreams for their new home. A proper kitchen garden, chickens, maybe a milk cow. They eventually settled in a valley in Oregon, where the land was green and fertile and the past couldn't follow. The first thing Boone built was a sturdy house with a stone foundation. Built to last, he said, like their marriage. Clara planted her garden starts and watched them take root in the rich soil. Years later, as Clara watched their children play in that garden, a boy with Boone's steady nature and a girl with her determination, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. The fear and loneliness of those early days seemed like another lifetime. Boone came up behind her, arms wrapping around her waist, chin resting on her shoulder as they watched their family together. "Ever miss it?" he asked. "Montana. Sometimes," Clara admitted. "But I wouldn't change anything. Every hard mile, every challenge, it all led us here." He turned her in his arms, and she saw in his weathered face the same love that had first bloomed in a rough cabin on the frontier. "That day you arrived on the stage, looking like a lost bird. Never imagined we'd end up here." "Where? Oregon?" "Happy," he said simply. "Never imagined we'd end up happy." Clara rose on her toes to kiss him, this man who'd taught her strength and whom she taught tenderness in return. "We earned it," she whispered. "Every bit of it." As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Clara knew that some journeys were worth taking. No matter how difficult the road, she'd been denied and diminished, had felt worthless and alone. But love, real love, tested by fire and strengthened by trials, had made her feel beautiful. Not just in Boone's eyes, but in her own. And that, perhaps, was the greatest gift of all. Thank you for listening to this tale from the American frontier. If you enjoyed Clara and Boone's journey, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just as our characters connected across the vast western landscape. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, courage, and redemption in the Old West. And share your thoughts about what touched you most in this tale. Happy trails, partners.